So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I have a problem. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, it's great to meet you. I'm Stella and I love making miniatures for Barbie's dollhouse using mostly cardstock. In today's video, I'll show you how to make this miniature dollhouse for your dollhouse, and as always, I have a free printable template to help you make your own version. You'll find all the infos and the download link in the video, so now let's get started. We'll begin by cutting this part of a template 3 or 4 times, and we'll stack all the layers together. As usual, I suggest using cardstock for molded packaging for this, since it's quite thick and sturdy, but really easy to cut and pretty much free, which, let's be honest, doesn't hurt. We'll top the resulting panel with this part, aligning one piece with the top and the other with the bottom. And for this part, I recommend using a lighter type of cardstock like this one because it's a bit thinner and I just think it has a really nice texture to it. The final panel should measure 2 mm in thickness. Next, we're gonna cut this part, and once again we'll have to cut it 3 or 4 times, and then we'll glue all the layers together. And if you're cutting by hand, I'd suggest using a craft knife for all these little cutouts. Next, we'll cut this part out of lightweight cardstock and we'll glue it to the back of the panel we've just assembled. The resulting piece should be 2 mm thick. We're gonna repeat the same process for all these parts. And by the way, I usually skip this step in videos to keep them short, but since I've been asked a lot lately, when attaching layers of cardstock, I like using glue rollers. They are super easy to use, they don't wet the paper and require no drying time, so they're my faves. We should end up with these 5 pieces, each 2 mm thick. At this point, we can cover the front and edges of each panel with a layer of acrylic gesso. I personally prefer applying it with a sponge, as it gives a nice plaster-like texture, which is perfect for making walls. Once the base coat is dry, we'll need to cover the bottom section of each panel with a piece of masking tape. And then we'll paint the upper section with acrylic paints. And here's a little trick. Adding a second layer of white to the unmasked section before the colored paint will give you a cleaner, sharper edge when you peel off the tape. And as always, I'll have the colors I used linked in the description, along with all the other supplies I used for this project in case you're curious. Once the paint has dried, I suggest placing all the panels between 2 sheets of parchment paper and then under something heavy like a big book for a few hours. This will straighten them, and also the paper will absorb any humidity left in the paint, preventing them from bending over time. Now, to create this stone-like texture on the lower half of the walls, we have 2 options. The first one, which I think works best if you're using my free printable template, is to cut a few tiny strips of cardstock like this. Then cut them into smaller, uneven pieces and glue them to the walls in a sort of random pattern. Finally, you can just paint over everything with another coat of acrylic gesso. The second option, which is my personal favorite, is to create a little stencil and use it with some spackling paste. This method is much faster than cutting all those teeny tiny stones one by one, and I think it looks a little more realistic. Now, I cut my stencil with the laser function of my M1 Ultra, however, you can also use a regular cutting machine like the Cricut or the Silhouette, and if you find it difficult to cut through the plastic, you can swap it for a sheet of copy paper covered with clear tape on both sides. And just a reminder, you can find my digital templates for cutting with a cutting machine in my shop, linked in the description. At this point, we can paint the stones, starting with a light base color applied with a sponge. And then we'll add some shading with a darker hue using a small brush. With the base ready, it's time to add a few details to the walls of our little dollhouse. First, we're gonna cut this part and we'll assemble the 2 sides like this. We'll repeat the process to make 5 more identical pieces, and then we'll paint 3 of them with acrylics this way. We should end up with these 6 tiny doors. We'll attach the white ones to the front of these 2 walls and the colored ones to the back. And for small parts like these, I like to use tacky glue. The applicator is super convenient and it dries clear, so any eventual excess won't be an issue. Next, we'll cut this part and we'll paint the center of these pieces with the same color we used for the doors. We'll combine the 4 elements together like this. And then we'll glue the 2 little window frames to the front of this wall. We'll repeat the same process for this part. Next, we'll cut this part, we'll paint the 3 frames the same color as the doors, and we'll glue the finished pieces to the back of this wall this way. Next, we'll cut this part into lightweight cardstock and we'll glue the 2 strips to the first wall like this. Then we'll cut this part and we'll glue the 4 pieces to the second wall, bending the strips on the left and right sides to make sure they cover the edges. We'll have to repeat the same process for all these parts, and by the way, if you have any doubts or questions, please let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. At this point, we can start connecting the walls of our dollhouse, combining these 3 parts like this. Then we'll add this wall, and finally this one. Time to begin working on the floors of our little dollhouse. First, we're gonna cut this part 3 or 4 times, and we'll glue all the layers together. The final piece should measure roughly 2 mm in thickness. We'll repeat the same step for this part. And then we'll attach the 2 panels together, aligning them along one edge, like this. To mimic the look of wood flooring, we'll cut another layer of cardstock and we'll emboss all these lines to create the texture of wooden planks. And if you're using my free printable template, I suggest using a ruler and a small dotting tool or an old pen that's run out of ink, like I showed you in this video. We'll attach the embossed layer on top of the previous ones, like this. And then we'll cover the entire piece with acrylic gesso, this time applied with a paintbrush. And I recommend using a brush with stiff bristles, as it will help create that wood grain-like texture we're aiming for. After that, we'll paint the whole piece with acrylics. And lastly, we'll coat the surface with a light layer of gloss varnish. We'll have to repeat the same process for this part, so we'll glue 3 or 4 layers together and we'll top the resulting piece with this embossed layer. The final piece should be around 2 mm thick, and we'll have to paint it with acrylic gesso first, then with acrylic paint, and finally with a touch of varnish. We should end up with these 2 panels. We'll glue this one here. And then we'll attach this one to the bottom of the house, aligned with the back. Next up, the balcony. We'll start by cutting this part multiple times, then we'll glue the layers into 2 groups, each around 2 mm thick. And finally, we'll coat them with acrylic gesso like this. Next, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times. We'll stack all the layers together, and then we'll cover the resulting piece with this embossed layer, just like we did for the floors earlier. Then we'll coat the panel with acrylic gesso. At this point, we can connect the 3 parts like this. Then we'll paint the top with acrylics and finish with a light layer of clear varnish. Next, we're gonna cut this part. We'll paint it the same color as the doors and windows. And we'll bend it along this line. Then we'll cover the front side with this part. And the back with these 2 pieces. We'll glue the resulting piece to the top of the previous one, this way. And finally, we can attach the balcony to the rest of our little dollhouse. Time to start working on the roof. First, we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue 2 sides together like this. The final piece should be roughly 1 mm thick. Next, we'll cut a bunch of tiny cardstock strips like these and we'll glue them to one side of the panel, starting from the bottom and working our way up, making sure each strip slightly overlaps the next. We'll have to repeat the same step for all these parts. We're gonna coat all the panels with a generous layer of acrylic gesso on both sides. And then we'll paint the top side of each part with acrylics, starting with a base color. And then we'll add a second lighter shade in spots like this. It's a subtle touch, but I think it makes the roof look more three-dimensional. Lastly, we'll coat all the panels with a light layer of gloss varnish. With all the parts of the roof ready, we can finally assemble it. And our teeny tiny miniature dollhouse is ready. As promised, here's a link to the free printable template, and if you want to make more tiny dollhouses like this one, you might enjoy watching these videos next. And this is all for today. Until next time, bye!